Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 3. I want to remind you that this week we're going over the chapters behavioral learning theories, chapters 7, 8, and 9. Now, chapter 7 we know is behavioral learning theories. Chapter 8 is the cognitive learning. And then we have chapter 9, which is memory and retrieval. Let me go ahead and share the page with you. Behavioral learning theories. Learning refers to the relative permanent change in knowledge or behavior that's a result of experience. Although you might think learning in terms of what you need to do before an upcoming exam, the knowledge you take away from your classes, or new skill you acquire during the practice. These changes represent only one component of learning. In fact, learning is a broad topic that's used to explain not only how we acquire new knowledge of behavior, but also how we acquire a wide variety of psychological processes. Okay. We have some other types of theories like post-traumatic stress disorder, and we also have like learning for human capacity. Learning allows us to create effective lives by being able to respond to changes. So this is important, knowing different types of theories, not just, theories to open things up to uh, just management and business. We should understand each other and what the needs are of our customers. There's classical conditioning by Ivan Pavlov. He won the Nobel Prize for studying digestion, but he also did something more famous, working with a dog. He had a bell and a bowl of food. Many people are familiar with classical study of Pavlov's dog, but rather rarely do they understand the significance of the discovery. In his famous experiment, Pavlov rang the bell and gave the dog some food. After repeating this pairing multiple times, the dog eventually treated the bell as a signal for food and began salivating in anticipation of the treat. And there is a picture right here of classical or Pavlovian conditioning. It's one of the fundamental ways that we learn about the world around us. But it's far more than just a theory of learning, also arguably a theory of identity. For once you understand the classical conditioning, you can recognize that your favorite music or clothes or even political candidate might all be a result of the same process that makes a dog drool at the sound of a bell. Here's the dog and the food. They're referred to as dog salivates. In image 2, the dog is introduced in a ringing bell. No response from the dog. In image 3, the ringing bell is paired with the dog's food. Dog salivates, and the dog becomes conditioned to salivate whenever he hears the ringing bell. We have stimulus generalization. It refers to tendency to respond to the stimuli that's responsible for original conditioning stimulus, the ability to generate or to generalize. It'd be a good idea to think twice before we eat some purple berries, right? The berries are not exactly the same. So yes, it's probably a good idea to know what you're eating before you eat it. It could be a poisonous one, right? Some things to remember when it comes to branding. Stimulus generalization is a basic idea of underlining numerous branding strategies that share the approach. Create a brand name that consumers learn to associate with the positive qualities. Paste that brand name on another reasonably similar products and stand back and let the positive associations transfer to the new item. We have family branding. Many products generalize or capitalize on the reputation of the company's name. Companies like Campbell's, Heinz, and General Electric rely on the positive corporate images. They sell different product lines. Product line extension, marketers add related products to the established brand. Dole, which we associate with fruit, introduced refrigerated juices and juice bars, whereas Sun-Maid went from raisins to raisin bread. And then we have licensing. Companies often rent well-known names, like Christian Dior licenses the designer name products to underwear and umbrellas. Okay, you have operational or operant instrumental conditioning. Operant conditioning occurs when the behavior is known as a stimulus associated with the occurrence of a significant event. The best known example is a rat in a laboratory learns to press a lever in a cage called Skinner box to receive food. Because the rat has no natural association between pressing a lever and getting food, the rat has to learn the connection. At first, the rat may simply explore the cage, climbing up to the top of things, burrowing under things in search of food. Eventually, while poking around in the cage, the rat accidentally presses the lever and food pellets drop in. This voluntary behavior is called an operant behavior because it operates on the level of environment and the action that the animal itself makes. Now, once the rat recognizes that it receives a piece of food every time the presses the lever, the behavior of lever pressing becomes forced. The food pellets serve as reinforced because they strengthen the rat's desire to engage in the environmental a particular manner. In a parallel example, imagine that you're playing a street racing video game and you drive through the city course multiple times and you try to do a shortcut, dramatically improving your overall time. You learn this new path through the operant operational conditioning that by engaging your environment, operant responses, you performed a sequence of behaviors that was positively reinforced. You found the shortest distance in your line, and now you've learned how to dress this course. If you perform the same sequence of driving behavior, just as a rat presses on the lever, you receive a award of the fashion finish. Operant conditioning research studies how the effects of behavior influence the probability that it will occur again. For example, the effect of the rat's lever pressing behavior is receiving a food pellet influences the probability that we'll keep pressing the lever. According to Thorndike's law of the effect, when a behavior has a positive, satisfying effect or a consequence is likely to be repeated in the future. However, when a behavior has a negative, painful, annoying consequence, is less likely to be repeated in the future, and negative reinforcement effects of the increased behaviors are referred to as reinforcers, and effects of the decrease are referred to as punishers. An everyday example that helps to illustrate operant conditioning is striving with a good grade in class, which could be considered a reward for students. It produces a positive emotional response. In order to get that reward, similar to the rat learning to press the lever, the student needs to modify their behavior. For example, a student may learn that speaking up in class gets them participation points as a reinforcer. So the student speaks up repeatedly. However, a student also learns that they shouldn't speak up just about anything. Talking about topics unrelated to school actually punishes the student and costs points, a form of punishment. Therefore, students' freely chosen behaviors, they learn which behaviors are enforced and which ones are punished. Understanding classical and operant conditioning provides psychologists with the tools for understanding learning and behavior in the world outside the lab. This is part of the two types of learning occurs continuously through our lives. It's been said that much like the laws of gravity, the laws of learning are always in effect. Marketers have developed a number of sales and marketing techniques based on principles of instrumental conditioning. We have discounts, rebates, reward programs, frequency marketing programs, gifts, and giveaways. There's some examples. Before we go to the next one, cognitive learning theories, I do want to show you a video on Pavlov. Okay, this is Pavlov's classical conditioning.
It's everything you wish for. Your site traffic is skyrocketing. Until this happens.
Classical conditioning is a way of learning where a stimulus that triggers a biological response is paired with a new stimulus that then results in the same reaction. The most famous work in classical conditioning was done by Ivan Pavlov in the 1890s. During this time, Pavlov did a lot of research around the digestive processes of dogs. One day during his research, Pavlov noticed that the dogs began to salivate in the presence of the technician who normally fed them. He wondered if the technician was a trigger that stimulated a response associated with food. To find out, he constructed an experiment that would allow him to measure a dog's output of saliva. First, he served the dog food. Then, he served food while playing the sounds of a metronome and repeated the process a few times. Finally, he removed the food and only played the metronome. The dogs began to salivate in response to the metronome alone. Pavlov concluded that if a new stimulus was present when the dog was given food, then that stimulus became associated with food and caused salivation on its own. When he published his findings, Pavlov called the food an unconditioned stimulus because its effects on the dog were not learned. Instead, they triggered an unconditioned response that happened naturally and completely out of the dog's control. The metronome is at first a neutral stimulus. Through the process of repetitive pairing with food, the dog learns to connect the two. This means that the neutral stimulus becomes the conditioned stimulus, and the response to that, a conditioned response. He also reported that 1. Learning occurred most rapidly when the interval between the sound and the appearance of the food was short. 2. The saliva produced by the sound differed in composition from that produced by the food, which means that the conditioned response was not an exact replica of the unconditioned response. 3. While there are several forms of conditioning, such as forward and backward conditioning, classical conditioning cannot create new behavior or be used for training, but instead triggers involuntary biological responses. 4. We can almost entirely undo the conditioning. This happens through extinction, when we repeatedly present the conditioned stimulus in the absence of the unconditioned stimulus. So, what occurs inside the brain? When a dog sees the food, the signals from the eyes and nose stimulate the brain, which activates the salivation glands to secrete saliva to aid the dog with the digestion. When a dog hears a sound, the ears send a signal to the brain, which takes note but has no reason to activate anything. When the two different neurological processes are being activated simultaneously, new synaptic connections occur between the auditory stimulus and the behavioral response. Over time, these synapses are strengthened so that it only takes the sound to activate the pathway leading to salivation. You can try this popular classroom exercise. Take a friend, sit down and relax for 2 minutes. Then allow your partner to check and record your pulse rate. Your partner will then tap a pencil on the desk 5 times. Right after, stand up and hop on one leg for 30 seconds and then check your pulse again. Repeat the procedure 4 times, having the partner record all data. After relaxing for the 5th time, your partner will tap the pencil 5 times as usual. Now, instead of getting up for your exercise, only check your pulse. If the conditioning was successful, your pulse rate will rise even without engaging in exercise. What do you think? Does classical conditioning always work? If so, are commercials a form of mental manipulation, and should we limit advertising in public spaces?
Sprouts videos are published under the Creative Commons license. That means our videos are free and anyone can download, edit, and play them for personal use. And public schools, Governments and nonprofit organizations can also use them for training, online courses, or designing new curriculums. To help us stay independent and support our work, you can join our patrons and contribute. Just visit patreon.com/sprouts. Even $1 can make a difference. If you have deep insights into academic topics and want to help us explain complicated ideas in simple language, please contact us at sproutsschools.com.
Okay, so you kind of have an understanding of Pablo and dogs. This is him and the dogs.
Are your kids in grades 6 to 11? Harvard has made SAT and ACT score submission optional.
Pavlov's aim was to discover what caused saliva to flow. He rerouted the salivary ducts to the outside of his dog's cheek so that he could collect and measure the spittle. Perhaps, he thought, the production of saliva might be the result of a fixed nervous reflex, like a knee jerk.
5 минут 42,5 секунды.
After taking many measurements of spittle, he confirmed that the dogs drooled automatically when their tongues touched food. He called the response the salivation reflex.
4,5. Хорошая собачка. Я предлагаю поменять собаку.
But his work started to run into trouble. As his dogs became familiar with the experimental routine, they started to fill their cheek tubes before Pavlov had a chance to stimulate their tongues. The dogs were learning to anticipate food. Pavlov tried a new technique. He erected screens so that the dogs couldn't see what was going on. Before passing meat through the hatch, he introduced a stimulus that was totally unrelated to feeding. A ticking metronome. At first, the dog dripped saliva into its cheek tube only when the food appeared. But after a number of trials, the dog began to connect the ticking with the arrival of meat. Soon, the sound alone made the dog drool. Eventually, the dog salivated as much to the ticking itself as it did originally to the presentation of food.
Полная. Идите сюда. Что я говорил?
He called this new response the conditioned reflex.
Собака.
Whatever the stimulus, his dogs could soon be conditioned to produce saliva. Pavlov believed that he had discovered how animals learned, even in the wild.
IXL is helping 10.
Right. Got some good information. Now you understand about how individuals can be conditioned. Cognitive learning theory approaches stress and the importance of external mental processes. The perspective views people and the problem solvers who actively use information in the world around them. And they master the environment. Supporters of this view also stress the role of creativity and insight during the learning process. One important aspect of the cognitive learning perspective is observational learning. This occurs when people change their attitudes or behavior simply by watching the actions of others. Learning occurs as a result of vicarious rather than direct experience. This type of learning is a complex process. People store their observations in memory. as they accumulate knowledge, perhaps this information at a later point to guide their own behavior. Modeling is a process of intimidating behavior of others. You should have no trouble thinking of advertisements you've seen that encourage you to model an actor's behaviors at a later time. Right here, children learn about the world around them by observing the behaviors of others. Over time, they eventually model these behaviors for information of preference, attitudes, and ultimately their decision-making consumers. Social models, they are typically higher status and authority compared to the observer, examples of which include parents, teachers, public health officers. An example above, the children who already know how to play the game should thought to be authorities and therefore social models, even though they're the same age as the observer. By observing how the social model behave, an individual is able to learn how to act in certain situations. Other examples of observational learning might include a child learning to place a napkin in the lap by watching their parents at dinner table, or customer learning where to find the washer after observing where the customer have gone when leaving the tables. Modeling. Modeling is a process of intimidating the behavior of others. This particular common form of learning for young consumers who often observe the behavior of others, often individuals who look up to admire, such as online influencers, and to intimidate their behavior. Naturally, when speaking to young consumers, the negative effect of learning model are clear. Smoking, high-risk behavior, violent self-harm are behaviors children not only by observing others, but also learning how to copy and perform on their own. The responsibility of advertisers with regard to the influence and the impact of children and young consumers has brought to question what would be marketed to kids and what should not. Remember advertisements for smoking? No, I do not. And grow up at the time when there's little consideration about effects, role models, and no children. Often seen smoking commercials and billboards, attractive and idealized adults modeled in young audience perceived joy and sophistication that came along with being a smoker. After years of security activism and eventually legislation, tobacco companies are no longer permitted to advertise to children and young consumers. Okay, this is anti-smoking commercials. Just let you know, you could be offended by these, but these are real smokers, and you could be offended by some of the looks that they might have. Just disclaimer.
I'm married, and I used to be a smoker. I want to give you some tips about getting ready in the morning. Learn your name. Then your head read the Bible. And now you're ready for the day.
Okay, so some people smoke and they get cancer or like strokes, heart attacks. Some of you might smoke and you're fine. That's great. You have a really good DNA maybe and a good filter for your body, but not everybody does. I had a student a couple years ago. She was a smoker and she actually had a stroke. Some people are fine. So, I mean, we just don't know. But those are some of the commercials they had.
Come back and get credit for the work you've put in at Purdue Global. With your experience and college.
Ed Smith, home after another day of stress. So his wife serves him foods like creamed soup, juicy roast beef, gravy, and desserts. Then she lights his cigarette and he's all set. set with a lifestyle that could lead to a heart attack. Ask your heart association how to reduce your risk of heart attack. It's one of the services you support when you give to the Heart Fund.
This is a smoking machine. It is used to test the nicotine and tar content of various brands of cigarettes. This is a smoking machine too, although he probably doesn't realize it. His lungs are also collecting tars and nicotine. One thing about this machine, it will never get heart disease or cancer from smoking. Can this machine make the same claim?
For information, ask your heart association.
Like father, like son. Like father, like son. Think about it.
For information on smoking and heart disease, ask your heart association.
If you took all the cigarettes in the world and laid them end to end, you would never have time to smoke a single one. Now, isn't that a great idea?
Grammarly's top 3 tips on starting an essay.
Let's say you're struggling to put pen.
All right, cool. We have the Pepsi generation. Although Pepsi history, Coca-Cola has utilized Molly theory of learning to convey a message to the consumers. Coca-Cola Conquest is a documentary that films the creation of Coca-Cola drinks in the United States and eventually around the world. Coca-Cola's main competitor is Pepsi. It's the only alternative in the shared history of what marketing historians call the Cola Wars. Proven Cola brand has always been a worthy competitor of the sugary drink Collaborate. Since the competition, Coke's marketing has represented equestrial American symbols and values of freedom and family, while often drawing on nostalgia and wholesome traditions in the target middle and family, while drawing on American consumers from the dominant culture. To differentiate itself from Coke, Pepsi is the alternative direction using pop culture imagery and icons to reach the street culture demographics. There's a documentary features the original Pepsi commercial starring Michael Jackson, who taken the world by storm in innovative creativity and catchy pop songs. Similarly, they had the supermodel Cindy Crawford lent her star power to the youthful brand by acting as somewhat of a spokesperson. This type of cognitive learning we refer to as modeling demonstrates how celebrities and pop culture icons directly influence the youth. Memory and retrieval. Most exciting advertisements are worthless if it doesn't make reasonably lasting impact on the receiver. So advertisers need to understand how our brains encode or mentally program. The information we encounter helps determine how we will remember, if we remember at all. In general, we have better chance of retaining incoming data we associate with other information already in memory. We have sensory memory, permits storage of information we receive from our senses. The storage is very temporary. It lasts a couple of seconds at most. For example, when we are talking to work as the past of the French bistro cafe and get you quick aromatic swift of the espresso and fresh croissants, although the sensation only lasts a few seconds, it's significant to allow you to consider what should investigate further. If you retain this information for further processing, it passes short-term memory. Short-term memory, it stores information for a limited period of time and is also limited capacity. The similar working memory is computer. It holds information we currently process. Our memories can store verbal input casually in terms of how we sound and systematically in the terms that it means. We store it when we combine small pieces into larger chunks, and a chunk is a configuration that's familiar to the person and they can think about it as a unit. For example, a brand like Beats by Dre can be chunk that summarizes a great deal of detailed information about the product. Long-term memory, LTM, is a system that allows us to retain information for a long period of time. Information passes the STM to the LTM as a process of elaborative rehearsal, and this means we actively think about the chunk's meaning and relate it to other information already in memory. Here's some brands that everybody probably knows the slogans: Nike, McDonald's, Vans, Simplex Theaters, Disneyland, Maybelline, Rice Krispies, Skittles, Red Bull, and IKEA. A lot of us can think of the song, the slogan, or maybe even the commercial that we saw. Encoding has a lot to do with the commercials that we watch. It's a process by which we replace things that we experience in our memory. Unless the information is encoded, it cannot be remembered. I'm sure you've seen a party where you've been introduced to someone, and then maybe seconds later you realize that you don't remember the person's name. Retrieval refers to the process of reactivating information that is stored in memory. Storing memories, we have schemas, patterns of knowledge to the LTM that help us organize information. State-dependent retrieval, we are able to assess information of our external state, for example, or mood at the time. Familiarity enhances recall. Indeed, it's one of the basic goals of marketers who try to create and maintain awareness of the products. Salience is a brand, refers to the prominence or level of activation in memory. Novelty, introducing a surprise element, and can be particularly effective in aiding recall. Pictorial versus verbal cues. It's a picture worth 1,000 words. Right here we can see a coronavirus, the mask. A lot of people, you wore the mask because you had to comply. But some people want to give it their own personality, so you could have got, the surgical ones in different colors, or you could have had it made in cloth. Some people had N95s in different colors. We have nostalgia. It defines nostalgia as a wistful and excessively sentimental yearning for a return of past period or reconceivable condition. For some, nostalgia inquires both happy and emotions that take us back in time that often feel simpler and less complicated. This is a reference, what was mentioned in the book. It's Launch Advertising and Promotion. So this is another book that's mentioned. There's an ebook mentioned here. So if you want more information, you can just click on these links. And then they mentioned some of these references here. Let me show you the trailer to this.
is a company that is home to a sacred formula. A secret so closely guarded, it is locked away in a dark vault. The formula for Coca-Cola. A brand consumed more than 900 million times every day.
I'd like to buy the world a home.
Okay, now I'm gonna show you a commercial. Okay, so this is the original one, and then they have a reunion one. Okay. This is the international one.
I'd like to buy the world a home and furnish it with love. Grow apple trees and honey bees and snow white turtle doves. I'd like to teach the world to sing. Sing with me. Perfect harmony. Perfect harmony. I'd like to buy the world a Coke and keep it company. And the real I'd like to teach the world to sing. To perfect harmony. And I'd like to buy the world a Coke and keep it company. It's the real thing. What the world wants today. It's the real thing. What the world wants today. Is the real thing.
And then here's a reunion.
You know it happened right here 20 years ago.
Right here, Mum.
Mm-hmm. You just can't imagine what it felt like.
I'd like to buy the world a home and furnish it with love. Grow apple trees and honey bees and snow white turtle doves. I'd like to teach the world to sing. Stop it. The feeling you get from a Coca-Cola can't beat the feeling. I'd like to teach the world to sing. The feeling you get from a Coca-Cola. I'd like to buy the world a Coke. Can't beat the real thing. Can't top it. No, you can't stop it. That is all the whole world singing. Can't beat the feeling. You can't beat the feeling.
All right. Well, that concludes today, and I will see you guys next time. This is week 3, a video signing out. Blessed week. Bye.